Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Brighter Black Futures podcast. I'm your host, Bisa Dobson, and today I've got a great episode for you that's all about a topic I'm super fascinated by, and it came up in episode 6 in my discussion with Karen Robinson-Renaud about the impact of autism spectrum differences on Black communities, specifically Black children and their families, and that is the topic of deficit model thinking. We don't want that. It's not a good thing, but it's super important to understand and know about so we can work against it in our families, in our lives, and in general as a community, because it affects everyone, all of us, and particularly marginalized communities. So let's get into it. So now it's time for the upliftment segment of the show. And as you know, if you've been here before, this is a time when I share a quote that I absolutely love, that totally inspires me, that ties in with the theme of the show. And since we're talking about deficit model thinking, which is a topic that is most often and most intensely and thoroughly discussed in educational circles, I'm sharing a quote from a great educator, Ms. Marva Collins, and the quote is, "The good teacher makes the poor student good and the good student superior." Again, the quote is, "The good teacher makes the poor student good and the good student superior." And what I love about the quote is, first of all, it's filled with so much hope. It talks about the impact that great teachers who care and are willing to pour into students, can make on their lives, and take a student who is not doing so well, who has been told they're not awesome and not good enough, and all the things, become and grow into being their best selves in the classroom and hopefully beyond. So that is a super inspirational quote to me. I hope you like it. And it makes you think about what you can do to make a difference in people's life, whether you're a teacher or not, by showing them that you care, pouring into them, and being willing to go the extra mile to make sure that they believe in themselves. You know what I'm saying? I like that quote a lot. Anyways, let's move on to the next segment. And now it's time for the Black History Moment. And today I'm going to tell you all about Marva Collins, a name you already heard in the past segment. She was a great educator that I think everyone should know about. So here we go. So Marva Collins was born on August 31st of 1936, and she started her early education in a town called Atmore, Alabama. And of course, at that time, there was a segregated school system that didn't give a lot of resources to African American students. Lucky for Marva, she had two great parents who were committed to her education, and they taught her as much as they could at home and really instilled a love of knowledge and learning in their child. So after her graduation from high school, she went to Clark College in Atlanta, became an educator, and then returned to Alabama, where she taught for 2 years before moving to Chicago and joining the boards there. And she taught in the Chicago school system for over 14 years. However, over time, she became truly dismayed with the low standards in the Chicago school system, and she decided to do something to make a difference. Marva made the bold decision to take $5,000 out of her retirement fund, the equivalent of $30,513 today, to start a private school in her brownstone that was located in West Garfield Park in Chicago. And she did this because she wanted to specifically help Black children who had been mislabeled as learning disabled to get great education at a low cost. By the end of its first year in business, Westside Preparatory School was a great commercial and educational success. Marva had taken the kids in her class, her son, daughter, and a few neighborhood kids, some of whom were deemed learning disabled, to new heights in their educational career. All the kids in her school at the end of the first year were scoring at least 5 grades higher on their standardized tests. Can you believe it? 5 grades higher in just 1 year, because they had a teacher who really cared. Of course, news of Marva's success with school children spread like wildfire, and she was soon profiled on 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, and in Time and Newsweek. As well, a TV movie called The Marva Collins Story was also made about her. She became so well known that Ronald Reagan offered her a position as Secretary of Education in the U.S. federal government, a position she declined because she wanted to continue developing Westside Preparatory Schools. Then in 1997, the Marva Collins Preparatory School of Wisconsin was opened, with schools following in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Florida soon after. Over the course of her career, Marva Collins trained over 100,000 teachers in North America, and she even traveled to Africa with the Young Presidents Organization to spread her teaching philosophy worldwide. Then, at the end of 1996, Marva decided to return to the Chicago public school system, specifically requesting to lead schools that had the lowest academic achievement and the lowest parental involvement. And within less than 6 months, she turned 2 of those 3 schools right around and improved their ratings by 85%. Now, due to her many achievements, Marva was awarded over 40 honorary degrees over the course of her career, and in 1982, she was honored as one of the legendary women of the world. And in 2004, George W. Bush awarded Marva with the National Humanities Medal, a very prestigious award. Marva Collins passed away on June 24th, 2015 at the age of 78. If you would like to learn more about her, be sure to check out her book, Marva Collins' Way, which was first published in 1982 and reissued in 1990. I'll be sure to leave a link to that and other resources about her in the show notes. Okay, I'm excited. It's finally time to talk about the meat, the juice of the podcast today, and that is deficit model thinking, deficit theory, however you want to call it. We're going to talk about it and get into it, do a deep dive so we all understand it and can find ways to combat it, hopefully, in our lives as a result of understanding what is happening to many children who are racialized or marginalized in the school system. All right, so first, to make sure we're all on the same page, allow me to give you the definition from Richard Valencia from his book, Dismantling Contemporary Deficit Thinking, was published in 2010, and here it is. So his definition at that time was the idea that minority students labor under intellectual handicaps because of their family structure, linguistic background, and culture. As you can see, deficit model thinking, deficit theory is not a good look for anyone. It would not be helpful for students trying to learn in the school system if they're perceived as different. Now, I'd also like to offer you a more contemporary definition that I found on the Oxford Reference website, and that is a perspective which attributes failures such as a lack of achievement, learning, or success in gaining employment to a personal lack of effort or deficiency in the individual rather than to failures or limitations of the education and training system or to prevalent socioeconomic trends. Again, deficit theory, deficit model thinking, not a good thing for any of us. Now, in a contemporary context, based on the research, the deficit model, deficit theory, shows up in 4 ways. Okay, so the first one is a blame the victim orientation. This is when a teacher might see a child in the classroom as a laundry list of their problems. They come with challenges because of their difference, whether it's socioeconomic, racial, or cultural, or language. And as a result, they're like, I can't connect with you. I can't teach you as well. You're not going to learn anyway because you are not normal. So that, of course, is harmful to a child's educational trajectory in some serious ways. And if that happens from early on, of course, that child's always going to be behind because how that first teacher sees them and reports about them on the report card is going to go to the next teacher and so on and so on. And also how that child starts to feel about themselves based on how they're being treated in the classroom. Sometimes inadvertently. I don't think that a lot of teachers do this on purpose, but if you have a lens where, oh, your difference makes you problematic or makes learning a problem for you, that's going to impact how the child sees themselves and how they learn over time. The second thing is that deficit model thinking has been grounded historically in racist and classist ideologies that deem oppressed persons as deficient. For example, in the 1700s, it was widely believed that enslaved African persons could not read and write. They were too stupid to learn how to read and write, and that fueled laws or led to laws and legislation that deemed it illegal to teach them how to read or write. And then up until the mid-1950s, of course, there was school segregation, and that was spurred by the idea that because of their intellectual inferiority, people who were from different racial groups would contaminate white children, would make them less smart if they were allowed to be in the same classrooms. And also tied to this idea is the idea that deficit thinking models are linked to meritocracy and colorblindness. We all have equal chance and equal opportunity. That's a level playing field. We all can do well if we just show up and work hard, which is not true. And downplays the fact that systemic forms of oppression based on race, class, ability, etc., can impact and shape a student's experience in the classroom. Now, the third thing is that deficit model thinking or deficit theory has a pervasive and implicit nature. So this type of thinking has permeated social and educational systems because it becomes an implicit and taken for granted feature in the discourse on social policy, political ideas, language, culture, and of course, in the educational sector as well. In fact, researchers have found that when you label a person something, so you label this child as learning disabled, as difficult, as high risk, those ideas, though they're meant to help when they're applied, actually lead to people believing, so educators believing, if we're talking about a student, that that child will not succeed. And of course, that's going to impact how they show up in the classroom with that child and how that child learns. So I'd like to add two ideas to that point about deficit model thinking being pervasive and implicit. So one of the things that Valencia also said in his book from 2010 was that deficit theory is protein. It shifts and changes, morphs depending on the time period you're dealing and what is acceptable as far as cultural values and mores. And for example, I'd like to share the idea that back in the 60s and 70s, it was acceptable, for example, to take indigenous children from their cultures and their parents to have them raised in more North American homes, read as white, because then they get better education, better values, and be better citizens. That idea is unthinkable today. Well, maybe not unthinkable, but definitely wouldn't be publicly discussed as this awesome thing that we're doing to help them be better. And now today you might find deficit thinking happening when a child from a different culture where they speak a different language or have a different religion shows up in the classroom and the teacher quietly thinks, but doesn't say it out loud, oh, that child's going to have difficulty or be a better student because they come from this culture, and traffics and stereotypes that they communicate outwardly or not that affect how they show up with the child. So deficit theory can be very explicitly said in moments when it's acceptable, in spaces where it's acceptable, but I think now it's probably morphed in most cases and becomes something that shows up quietly, and that is not as overt and probably harder to see because things that were acceptable in the 1960s and 70s cannot be done today. So deficit theory adapts to the time period that we're dealing with and the cultural mores of the day. Second, I want to talk about something that happened or that I just thought about and recognized in 2020 for the first time in a really, really big way that speaks to how implicit deficit thinking can be. So middle of 2020, we're in the middle of pandemic, everybody's scared at home or otherwise. The world has changed under our feet and like so quickly, overnight it feels, in two blinks, and we're all freaking out. And lots of commentators are on TV talking about how we're going to handle the situation should we not have enough resources to go around for everybody. And I remember seeing a post from a woman who is living with a disability, who's raising a child, she's a mom, and she posted this clip from a news source. I cannot remember which one it is for the life of me. But I remember these men were on the show talking about the fact that if we don't have enough ventilators to go around, should we hit crisis point? I think it was the US and they're comparing themselves to Italy, which was ahead of the curve as far as what was happening with respect to COVID at that time. We will just take ventilators from people who are sickly or disabled and don't have a good quality of life anyway, and just give it to people who are healthy and have a better chance to live. And she was saying, so because I'm in this body, in this wheelchair, and lack the capacity of a completely able-bodied person, my life should be taken. My daughter shouldn't have a mother. And I remember that moment thinking I'd never even thought about that, which is so ridiculous to think about now for me, now that I recognize it. But we casually talk about people's value based on how productive they are in society, which means that people who have disabilities, people who are old, people who are not as physically capable or mentally capable, they're just, they're kind of expendable humans. And they were talking about a national television in a way that was so comfortable and easy. And I'm sure they were never called in a real way. And I think millions of people were accepting this idea that I probably would have accepted, wholeheartedly or to some extent, had I not seen this woman's clip. So it's so easy to be doing deficit thinking and not know you're doing it. And that one woke me up as far as that issue. I think very differently about that now, those kind of issues now. But just to say that I think it's easy to cast blame and say, oh, this person's doing it wrong and, I would never, et cetera, et cetera. But like, just to show how easy it is to be taking on these ideas that are in the ether so implicitly, like it's just, you're taking it in because you're exposed to it and not know. So we all really need to question how we think about these kinds of issues of difference, and not problematizing them, or leaning into not problematizing them, and thinking about how we can be more accepting and not just tolerant, but see those people as valuable whole humans just like ourselves, even though they're different from us. So those are two things I want to say about that particular piece. And the fourth and final piece is that deficit thinking, deficit theory reinforces hegemonic systems. So oppressive systems abound. There's all kinds of systemic oppression, but because deficit thinking is so common in our society, it reinforces and upholds those systems. So because of deficit theory, there are teachers who have low expectations of the students in front of them because of their difference. And for those students who can see and feel that, they start to disengage. And then, of course, there's a whole lot less learning going on in the classroom because of that situation. Also, deficit thinking makes it easy to say, hey, let's put that on the kids, the individual, and not worry about it. We don't have to look at breaking down systems of oppression and resolving inequities in a serious way. And that happens in the classroom all the way up to the most powerful policymakers in the land, whatever land you happen to be in. So that is the way that deficit thinking reinforces current systems of oppression as well. So to recap, deficit model thinking is something that causes all of us, teachers, or most often discusses people who have deficit model thinking, but I think all of us moving through the world do this because we live in a society that normalizes seeing difference as problematic. So deficit model thinking problematizes difference and makes any deficiency we perceive a person have their problem. We blame the victim. When we do that, we're upholding ideas of oppression, racist ideologies racist and classist ideologies that have been around forever, and see people who are different, people who have been oppressed, as deficient. These ideas are pervasive and implicit in nature. It's so easy to be thinking and operating this way and not knowing. You have to really work to not be doing this and be very aware of how you're thinking and moving with people who are different from you. And finally, this idea also upholds systems of oppression and keeps inequities going in our society. So, since we all don't want those things, I'll definitely be putting some resources in the show notes that you can look at to start to dismantle your deficit thinking. They're designed for teachers, but I think anyone can use them. And I hope you all learned something today and got value out of this, and are maybe thinking, how is this showing up in my life? How am I seeing somebody who's different from me? Particularly if it's a child, because we don't want this to impact children and how they grow. How am I seeing their difference as a problem and not connecting with them in a way that is authentic, real, and good because of that difference? And what is the separations that it's being caused by my perception when I'm looking at somebody else? I think if we all do that, the world will be a better place, like for real, for real. All right, that's all I have for you today. Please go out there and have the best days possible. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Till then, take care. Bye.